On the Majority Report on the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program the executive editor of the American Prospect, which, let me just say, if you have not visited the Prospect or you do not read Unsanitized, David Dayen's daily email blast, you are making a big mistake if you're interested in knowing what's going on. David Dayen, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Sam.
Oh, and I also should say, author of Monopolized. We just had you on for that as well.
Yes, Monopolized Life in the Age of Corporate Power, wherever you get books.
Now, let's talk about. Let's start with We'll start with the bidets because I know you're terribly interested in that. But then we will go.
I am just interested that I'm glad to hear that you stand behind the products that you advertise.
Well, stand behind. Thank you. I appreciate that. That was very, very well
that was
done.
Subtle. It was subtle.
No,
but it was there.
Yeah, that's right. So, but let's go. Let's go. We'll save that for the end. Let's put a pin in that, as it were. And
let's put a pin in that and then throw it away. But
yeah.
Yes.
Last week there were antitrust hearings. We didn't hear much about them. I think they got overshadowed by the Bill Barr hearing to a certain extent. And just, it is, I think it's very hard for people to sort of wrap their heads around the idea of like government functioning in any way right now, including the House, because there haven't been any like the oversight hearings you would expect. But this was sort of a rare, hopefully a glimpse into the near future in terms of two things, in terms of like government going back to actually like doing things that are, that like functioning, right? I mean, in some way, just like looking into an issue and dealing with it. And the other thing is antitrust, which I think like there was going to be a big push on this 4 years ago. People were presuming Hillary Clinton would be the president, and all the antitrust forces were gearing up, and it feels like it's happening again. Your book, Zephyr Teachout's book, et cetera, et cetera. So tell us what happened during this hearing.
Yeah, I mean, it was on the front page of the New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal the day after the hearing. So I think it had an impact. I think that impact was buffeted by the fact that the day after the hearings, these same four companies all announced their earnings, and the earnings showed that in a quarter when economic activity fell by 33%, all four of these organizations increased their profits above expectations and brought in over $200 billion in revenue in the quarter.
We're talking, to be clear, we're talking Apple, Google, Facebook,
and Amazon. That's right. So, if anything overshadowed it, it was the fact that the earnings call kind of reinforced the fact that these companies have a tremendous amount of power, and that was what was shown in the hearings. You're right to say that the actual functioning of government that we saw on display on, not entirely, but largely a bipartisan basis. In this hearing, which is the culmination of a year-long investigation that was done solely out of the antitrust subcommittee. I mean, sometimes you hear an investigation is going on, and it's really just parroting news reports. But this was an actual investigation where witnesses were gone through, where documents were recovered, where inside information was revealed. And what it showed is that these companies muscle out rivals, take advantage of partners, and aggrandize their power at every step of the way. And most of the CEOs who were questioned at that hearing essentially admitted the charges that were being made by the various members of Congress.
So, like, why did they do that? Like, what were some of the bigger charges? And like, why would they? Did they just come in there and think like, these guys aren't gonna. This is just, this is a joke, or these guys just so, I guess, full of themselves that they just sort of feel like the idea of a congressman asking me a question that's going to stump me. I mean, like what? Like, how do they come in there and provide this type of fodder? And to a certain extent, let's be clear, it was. I mean, it wasn't totally bipartisan. There was, I think there was a significant Republican contingency who wanted to basically talk about shadow banning, but
Right.
but like, how do they come in there and just sort of, lay it
Well,
out
I
like
think
that?
the subcommittee had the goods. I mean, the subcommittee, for example, let's just take Facebook. So the subcommittee had internal documents showing that Mark Zuckerberg and his chief financial officer, when they made the purchase of Instagram in 2012, were talking very openly about the fact that they needed to do this to get rid of a competitor, and that they viewed Instagram as a threat, and that they created essentially a clone of what Instagram did as leverage in the negotiation to acquire the company. In other words, what they said to Instagram was, we're gonna mock up what you do, and you can either join us, or we're just going to crush you because we have more users than you do, and we'll just steal all of your eyeballs. And they actually did this later with Snapchat, right? They made the same ultimatum to Snapchat. Snapchat said no, and they just copied what Snapchat does. It's called Facebook Stories, and sought to reduce their market share. So, when you have that documentary information, they Mark Zuckerberg tried to put a spin on it. He said, "Well, we thought that we could partner with them, and that this would be better for users." And so that's one thing. The second thing is that, I mean, my feeling is these CEOs feel like the laws as interpreted today work in their favor. The Instagram purchase, for example, was approved by the Federal Trade Commission. And in fact, Republicans on the committee said that openly. Like, if this was such a problem, why did the Federal Trade Commission approve it? Which, is exactly the problem. And they just feel like they'll be able to fight this out among the regulators and in courts. And the House Antitrust Subcommittee can bring up all these very clear harms, but in the absence of changing laws and changing personnel, they're kind of insulated, and they've spent lots and lots of money to get that.
So, okay. So what do you say? I mean, you say the clear harms. I mean, what do you say to someone who says like, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, Facebook, they bought Instagram, and they have more users. So why can't they do that?
I mean, it's prima facie anti-competitive conduct. Like, it is within, you cannot seek to acquire a monopoly. That is in Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And the fact that they were able to do it is kind of backwards looking justification.
We're losing you a little bit.
Hello? Am I there?
Yeah, something weird is happening with your phone, but go ahead.
I'm sorry. The fact that they've kind of backwards justified it by saying that the FTC approved it, I mean, that's fine, but the law itself, if you read the letter of the law, they violated it. And Jeff Bezos said something similar. By the way, all these companies have acquired massive amounts of competition in order to secure their power. Jeff Bezos said specifically that we acquire companies in order, because of market position, which is illegal. Like, you can't do that. You can't just acquire a company so that you can monopolize a segment of the market. That is a violation of the Sherman Act as written. The Sherman Act as interpreted over the last 40 years is, why I wrote my book. It's the reason that we've allowed these mergers to sort of be waved through, and why we're in the state that we're in with this massive amount of corporate power that affects our daily lives in myriad ways.
All right, so let's talk. I mean, let's talk about sort of from a practical standpoint. Let's give an example for each of these companies as to like what we could do and the benefits that would accrue from that. So, Facebook, I mean, the one of them with things to do would be say like, yeah, you're going to have to spin off Instagram, and you're going to have to like end stories, or what exactly? Like what would you do with Facebook to start with? I mean, I imagine also there would be a lot of like, you can't use your data in the way that you're using it for advertising and whatnot. But what else would you do?
Right. I mean, spin-offs and divestitures are one. I think you do go after the business model. I called a few years ago for just banning targeted advertising. This is the problem. Another thing that came up in the hearing was the difficulty of publishers to sell any form of advertising that's in any way valuable, because Facebook and Google have commandeered that digital ad market. One way to stop that is to say targeted advertising at a specific individual is not allowed. The U.S. government has plenty of authority to regulate advertising. They do it all the time, tobacco ads and whatnot. And what this would do is allow publishers then to use the aggregate specialness of their audiences to sell ads. So, I mean, we're not banning market research. You can say that the Wall Street Journal readers are largely more affluent and they're interested in business, and so advertisers who cater to those individuals can join us, and they'd be likely to be favorable. That's something that almost doesn't happen right now outside of a few isolated cases, because Facebook and Google can give you that precise market and track that precise person everywhere around the web. So it ruins the ability for an audience to be built on the basis of content, and then to be able to afford to be able to finance that by selling advertising to that audience. So that's one thing for, in the case of Facebook.
All right, hold on. I want to make this clear, because I don't think this is a point that people really fully appreciate what it does to all of these publications. I mean, in the case of, let's say, if they got into the audio business, I guess, or whatever it was, like there's no. It basically means that there's no, they could wipe me out in terms of advertising, because. Right. The group of people that I'm attracting for this, or theoretically the relationship I have with the audience, would be just overcome by, Google and Facebook knowing that, like, oh, these folks are, have been, bidet curious for whatever.
They've been purchasing. Yeah. They've been looking, scrolling bidet websites, fan sites for days, and so they know to track those individuals. So why would the bidet company go to you? They would go to the people most likely to buy bidets. And yes, that is the larger problem. By the way, we're seeing in the podcasting market, Spotify kind of taking over a lot of these networks, and the ad tech, which is to move into Google. Google owns both Google and also the ad exchange server, where individuals buy advertising, and so they can use that to favor their own products. So it's a separation there of saying Google cannot run websites where advertising is placed, and also the ad placement auction mechanism. That separation could be an example of one thing you can do.
Okay, and then Amazon, one of the big things would be to prevent them from both having the marketplace, being the marketplace, and then putting their own products and favoring those products in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think a larger thing is banning predatory pricing, which is something that is actually already under the law technically illegal, and that's selling things well below cost in order to monopolize a particular market segment, and then presumably raising those prices over time. And there's a guy named Shaul Sussman, who's with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, who has laid out a pretty convincing case that Amazon has for years engaged in exactly that, whether by themselves or through their third-party individuals who they tell you have to lower your prices and give us the lowest price possible. This has had the effect of raising prices elsewhere, which, if you're under a consumer welfare standard where price is the important thing, if the effect of Amazon is raising prices elsewhere, then there's a plausible case even under the constrained kind of understanding of antitrust right now. So, that's something to do. There's talk that, Amazon Web Services essentially subsidizes the rest of the business lines, so you cut those business lines. I think that there needs to be some sort of rate regulation. What we've seen with Amazon, and this was brought out in the hearing, is that a few years ago, about 19% of sales of third-party sellers who sell on the Amazon marketplace was going to Amazon. And now that's up to 30%. And when Bezos was asked about this, he said, yeah, but they're getting more stuff from us, like fulfillment by Amazon. And what was left unsaid is that sellers report that they have to buy Amazon services in order to get better placement and get eyeballs on the website. And that's an illegal practice known as tying. You're saying that you have to not only go on our website, but you have to let us do the shipping and let us do the logistics in order for you, and pay us for that, in order for you to make a sale. And you can't just tie those things together. So, there's a credible antitrust case to be made against Amazon over that.
So Apple and Google, Google obviously, having targeting ads, having ads and search functions is a little bit problematic, right?
Monopolizing search, also kind of a tying issue of, website owners who believe that they can't get onto the top page of Google search without buying an ad, because ads now populate the first half of the page on Google search. And so you can't even optimize yourself for high placement in Google search. You have to pay them to be searchable, which is another form of tying. So that could be the basis of a lawsuit. With Apple, it's the App Store, where app developers report very high amounts of fees that have to be given to Apple in exchange for access to iPhone users with their apps. So,
True.
And that has been pretty well documented.
Been there, and very difficult. Like, they wouldn't even let us, when we did the app, our Majority Report app, they would not let us link to our subscription page. So you couldn't even leave the app if the destination was a page where they could decide to become a member. They would not allow us to do the app. And
so they're walling the garden so that what you're describing is sort of living under the private law of Apple. So Apple created this market, and now they govern it. And there's no sort of outside regulatory standards other than what Apple creates. It's kind of the fallacy of deregulation. There's no deregulation. There's regulation by Apple in this case, or by Amazon, or by Google, or by Facebook. That's what happens when we get deregulation. It's now being done in the name of private interest for their own benefit, rather than the name of public interest for the public good.
And what do you say to the argument of but if you do what you're talking about with Apple, where's their incentive to develop the iPhone?
the $700 they make on the iPhone? I mean, that just seems like an absurd question. The majority of Apple's funding or revenue comes from the manufacturing and sale of hardware. The fact that they're leveraging this app market is just sort of an icing on the cake, and it's being done in a way that stunts the development and growth of entrepreneurs that want to deliver their whatever talent or that they have using these apps.
I mean, I just, because I think there are, sort of people out there who just assume like, well, if Apple built it, why can't they completely control it regardless of what it does to the rest of society? And, it
right.
is. It's,
and I mean, I guess the answer is that we created a system 100 years ago that said that no one company can control society, can control markets in this fashion. We made a determination, and Congress has not repealed it, that competition is healthy, and the way in which a regulated capitalism can move forward, that these antitrust and anti-monopoly laws are essential so that you don't get runaway inequality, stagnant wages. Are all these things sounding familiar as to
right.
what we're experiencing right now? So you don't get all that stuff.
And we should say, I just want to remind people too. I mean, because again, people go out and they're making arguments to their uncles or their nieces, or I don't know why, any of their friends, their coworkers, their family. We also have other laws in our society, like the president's not allowed to be a king or a queen, or like society is set up with this. Right. These are all decisions that we make. There are no natural rights of a company. A company does not exist in nature. There are no natural rights. We decide what kind of society we want. We also, say that meat processors can't, if some rat feces fall into the hamburger, they can't sell it. There shouldn't be rat feces. It's even though that they have their own machines and whatnot. And
another law that we created in the past is the RICO laws, racketeering and corruption laws. And when you watch these hearings, you really got the sense that what you were watching were a bunch of racketeers. They were talking about how they intimidate their rivals, how they create a climate of fear among their partners and suppliers. There weren't a lot of consumers on display. It was just about how everybody that associates with these companies ends up, in a method of fear against them. And, we have racketeering laws to deal with that as well. So, you're absolutely right. We decide to create this society, and no government has no private government in terms of corporation has a right to profit, has a right to control.
Give me a sense, and I know that we talked about this, but I mean, where do you think is Congress further out ahead of this than you thought that they were?
Well, I mean, I think Congress, in this case, you're talking about this subcommittee,
right?
Which is, there are 15 people who, among the 435 members, who have really looked at this issue. They are the members of the subcommittee, and what they found was enough for them to be, very aggressive towards these particular companies, because this investigation was only about the tech industry, and our monopoly problem goes well beyond the tech industry, going into health and agriculture and transportation and what have you. But when they dug in on these issues, this is what they found, and the result of that is going to be a report, and the report is going to either suggest remedies for these companies or new legislation to deal with these companies, or new gaps in enforcement of the existing laws that the antitrust agencies, namely the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department, need to address. So it's going to be one of those three things, or probably all of those three things. And that's going to be the blueprint, I feel, for the next Congress and the next administration. So we'll have a new group come in, and there'll be a yardstick here. Here's a report that says these are the things that you have to undertake if you want to live up to this ideal notion that we need. We can't have concentrated power in the hands of a few dictating the whims of our economy and our society. So the choice will be very clear.